Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show, brought to you by Tissot, official timing partner of the Tour de France. Coming up this week, as the second week of the Tour de France draws to a close, is the race done and dusted? Tadej Pogacar is certainly showing little signs of weakness. We've had a similar level of dominance at the Giro Donne, which finished yesterday. Plus, we've got the Baloise Ladies Tour and all the latest transfer gossip. First up, the Tour de France, and a second week that saw 4 solo wins, 2 bunch sprints, and a 45-year-old record equalled. And not just any old record, one held by the greatest cyclist of all time, Eddy Merckx. In winning stage 13, Mark Cavendish took his tally of stage wins to 4 at this Tour de France and 34 in his career, putting him equal with Merckx and with 2 potential sprint stages still remaining. It's something that cycling media has been speculating about since 2016 when Cavendish took 4 stage wins at the race, but I don't think there were many people over the last couple of years who thought he had any chance of doing it, probably not even himself. It's been unmentionable in terms of questions to Cavendish, who'd prefer to just appreciate 1 stage win at a time, but it's a stat that we have to mention because it's so impressive. None of us are comparing Cavendish to Merckx, 2 completely different types of riders, but equaling any of Merckx's many records is a monumental achievement, particularly in the modern era. More than that though, the Manxman's comeback is a story of grit and determination, of not giving up. He's been a shadow of his former self for the last few years, battling back from illness and battling through bouts of depression. He'd been written off as a winner by many, including myself, and not for the first time in his career either. But despite all of that, he has done it, and this was what he had to say after that stage.
Whoa. Oh, I went deep there. I went so deep there. The boys were incredible. Oh. Can't believe it.
And it was tense indeed. I mean, de Klerk had a crash. You had to change your bike. At a moment, it looked like it wouldn't happen, but it did.
Well, a lot of the day, it didn't feel like it was going to happen before I had to. The guys are riding like they were. I was so on the limit. You saw at the end, slightly uphill. Ballero was there, and then Cortina went, that was a good jump. I was just lucky to have Morkov there. He just dragged him back. I was like, the lads just played it calm. I lost a little bit on that last right-hander. The roads with about 4 or 5k to go got a bit slippy. I thought I'd punctured, and then everyone else was like, "Oh no, it's the road. It's not your tyre."
He had to go deep for that one, didn't he? He was, as ever, full of praise for his teammates, who were once again incredible in their control of what was a long and tough stage, but also in their final lead out to the line. Michael Mørkøv was, as ever, way more cool, calm and collected than anybody should be capable of being in the last few 100 metres of a sprint stage. And that man makes his job look far too easy, in my opinion, but he's at the very top of his game right now, smoothly guiding Cavendish to the line and managing to take second place himself to boot. So good is he at his job that it's got to the point where it feels like the best sprinter in the world is simply whoever Mørkøv is leading out to the finish. And according to El Tio Del Dato on Twitter, he's been part of 45 sprint wins at De Koning Quick-Step since 2018. Gaviria, Viviani, Jakobsen, Hodge, Bennett and now Cavendish have all benefited from the Great Dane, who's shown no signs of slowing down even at the age of 36. Meanwhile, in the general classification battle, Pogacar has been almost utterly dominant. After putting 5 minutes into all of his key remaining rivals in the opening week, courtesy of another phenomenal time trial and 2 scintillating attacks in the mountains, he's therefore had the luxury of only having to follow moves as opposed to making any himself. However, his one small moment of weakness, if you can call it that, came on the second ascent of Mont Ventoux on stage 11. Ineos Grenadiers had been setting a solid tempo all day, but it was Jonas Vingegaard who profited most from it. He attacked twice in the final few kilometres of the climb, and on the second of those, he put the yellow jersey into difficulty. By the top, the gap was over 40 seconds, and although that had been erased by the end of the descent to the finish line, it gave us all hope that there could still be a genuine GC battle to play out at the race. It was Wout van Aert who won that Queen stage, and he is the first current Belgian champion to win a mountain stage of the Tour de France since Eddy Merckx, who last did it in 1970, also on Mont Ventoux. And the way he did it was quite spectacular, dropping some of the world's best climbers from the breakaway and setting a metronomic tempo that saw him lose very little time to the GC riders until close to the summit. The fact that he'd come second to Mark Cavendish in a sprint just 24 hours previously highlighted, as if it were needed, his versatility as a rider. The last rider to share those qualities was Sean Kelly, and here's what he had to say about the comparison on the breakaway show last night.
Sean, you and your day against Wout van Aert, who would you put your money on?
Well, depending on what event you're talking about. In cyclocross, no chance.
We're not talking cyclocross, we're talking any road stage.
Well, I think Van Aert in the big mountains, he is, better than I would have been. I always, was a rider who could follow. Certainly wasn't able to make those sprints to the top of the mountains like he was doing today. I was more of a grinder, and I just lose a bit of contact and keep my own pace and get back in on the when there'd be just a slope up front or on the descents. I did it a lot of times, so I would give Van Aert, definitely a better climber than I was in my best days.
But everywhere else...
Exactly. Wow, you can have the high mountains, everything else belongs to Sean. I love that humility.
I loved the slight hesitation in answering the question there, which gave the answer in itself. In the other stages, Niels Pollitt gave Bora Hansgrohe their first win of the race on stage 12, which was the day that Sagan went home, after a display of raw power that nobody was going to be able to match. Remarkably, that was only the second win in Pollitt's career, and of course by far the biggest. We also learnt last week that Bauke Mollema doesn't use a bike computer and hasn't done so for the last 2 years. Many of you actually noticed the lack of head unit on his bars as he came across the finish line to win stage 14. And later that evening, teammate Julien Bernard tweeted to say that Bauke constantly asks his teammates how far there is to go in the stage. Not sure of the reason behind that, probably just wants to focus on the race rather than the numbers, which seems quite sensible. I also loved this tweet from SRAM after his win. An in-joke there in bike racing circles after Bauke was heard issuing expletives about his group set at the 2019 Giro d'Italia. And that was only the third Tour de France stage win for Trek Segafredo as a team since the bike brand took over as headline sponsor back in 2014. I don't know why, but I thought they'd had far more success at the race than they have. 2 of those wins now have come from Mollema, with Degenkolb taking the other one on that cobbled stage back in 2018. Yesterday saw Jumbo-Visma take their second stage win of the race. 3 of their remaining 5 riders infiltrated the day's breakaway, setting up Sepp Kuss for an attack on the final climb. He gapped Alejandro Valverde there, and after a frantic descent into Andorra-la-Vella, where he now lives, he had time to sit up, throw a shade into the crowd and celebrate the biggest win of his career. It's been interesting to watch Jumbo-Visma's strategy after losing Roglic, with Vingegaard looking more than capable of a podium and the only rider to have put Pogačar under any sort of pressure. Many have questioned why they haven't given him more support. Now, some have said it's because they don't want to put too much pressure on him, but with those 2 stage wins now in the bank, you'd imagine they'll now put all their eggs into his basket. Ineos Grenadiers, on the other hand, have stuck rigidly with their GC plan despite Geraint Thomas falling out of contention, and as a result, haven't had a stage win. In fact, they haven't even had a single top 5 on a stage, and as things stand, Richard Carapaz is outside the podium positions, with 2 riders ahead of him who are arguably stronger in the time trial. And it's going to be interesting to see if they can change their strategy for the final week of racing, because they've got plenty of riders more than capable of taking a stage win over the last 6 days. One other thing of note from the race so far is that we're yet to see a small group sprint for the win. Of the 15 stages raced to this point, 1 has been a time trial, 5 have been bunch sprints, and 8 have been won by a solo rider. I'm not sure when that last happened. Kilian's not talking to me anymore as I've stolen too many of his stats. I do know, though, through my own thorough research, that this has been the most attritional Tour de France since 2012. This year, so far, 37 riders have gone home, but back in 2012, 42 had gone home by this point in the race, many as a result of that mass high-speed pile-up on stage 6 to Metz. Edvald Boasson-Hagen was the latest casualty. He finished well outside the time limit yesterday and will be at least 1 more man down when the race resumes tomorrow. Vincenzo Nebley making an early exit in order to prepare for the Tokyo Olympics. So this is how things look in the top 10 on GC going into the final week of racing. Pogačar and UAE Team Emirates currently look unbeatable, but then this is the Tour de France and anything can still happen. Meanwhile, if you thought Pogacar and UAE were dominating things at the Tour de France, it was nowhere near the level of Eddy Merckx and Anna van der Breggen over at the Giro Donne. Things resumed after last week's racing news show with a mountain time trial, where van der Breggen went so fast, she not only won the stage by over a minute from teammate Demi Vollering, she also put 12 riders out of the race as they'd failed to get inside the time limit. That win put the world champion almost 6 minutes clear of any non-teammate, with Ashleigh Moolman-Pasio in second and Demi Vollering in third, both at around 3 minutes. Lorena Wiebes of Team DSM got herself off the mark with a sprint which she backed up with a second one 3 days later. And that brings her win tally for the season up to 10 this year and 33 in total over her career at the age of just 22. And there seems to be quite a lot of unrest in the men's DSM squad, but clearly there are no problems on the women's side. Wiebes still, though, has some way to catch up with Marianne Vos, and I'm not sure anyone will ever catch her up. Stage 7 marked her second win of this year's race and her 30th career stage victory at the Giro Donne. Of those, 29 were in road stages, and she's only finished 76 of them, so a 38% strike rate. On top of that, she's finished in the top 3 of 60% of the road stages she started. Now, she didn't start the 10th and final stage of the race yesterday in order to give herself an extra day of recovery ahead of the Tokyo Olympics road race. That, of course, an event that she last won at London in 2012. Emma Norsgaard won her 6th race of the season for Team Movistar in a sprint on stage 5. DSM had ridden for Corinne Rivera that day, but she had to settle for second. Stage 9 on Saturday saw yet more success for Eddy Merckx, but the first success at this particular race for Ashleigh Moolman-Pasio. The South African has spent 10 years trying to get herself off the mark at the Giro. She's had 2 second places, 12 thirds, so I think everyone in the world of cycling was very pleased to see such a talented and committed rider finally take that win. It still left her in second place on GC, but just 1 minute and 23 seconds behind van der Breggen. But that would be how the GC would still look after the 10th and final stage, won by Corinne Rivera, who made it 2 big wins on the same day for the USA. The DSM rider got away with Lizzie Deignan and managed to outsprint her to the line, and it was an emotional win. Rivera sadly lost her father to COVID back in March, and this is what she had to say in her post-race interview.
And I think there was somebody special who was looking at you today.
Yeah, that was for my dad. And also, it's my fiance's birthday, and I'm not home, so that one was for him too.
You fight it very hard. Anna and Lizzie weren't collaborating, but you wanted so much.
Yeah, I had a little extra motivation, a little angel above me, so I think I had a little extra push from my dad today.
Congratulations.
Rivera will now head to Tokyo, where she will compete in the road race. So a 1-2-3 for Eddy Merckx in the GC, a 4th title for Anna van der Breggen in her final year as a pro, with Lizzie Deignan the best of the rest in 4th place overall, over 6 minutes down. It wasn't the only women's race last week though. We also had the 4-stage 3-day Baloise Ladies Tour in Belgium. Both the prologue and the Stage 2B individual time trial there were won by Canyon SRAM's Lisa Klein. The German's performances against the clock were enough to give her the overall classification as well, whilst the other 3 stages were all won by Dutch women. 21-year-old Misha Bredevold took her first pro victory in a 3-up sprint on stage 1 for the Park Hotels Valkenburg team. 22-year-old Charlotte Kuhl won for NXTG Racing on stage 2A, whilst the 4th and final stage was won by 21-year-old Lonneke Uneken of Eddy Merckx. I'm starting to feel very old indeed. Moving on, this week on GCN Plus, it's almost all about the Tour de France. The race resumes tomorrow and will continue through to Sunday with those traditional laps around the Champs-Élysées in Paris. However, we do have one other live race for you this week on Sunday, the one-day Volta Limburg Classic. Nizzolo, Gaviria and Christoph all on the provisional start list for that one. Commentary will be from Jose Bain and Magnus Bagstedt, and it will be available to watch in all GCN Plus territories except for the USA and Canada. Right, I will end this week's show with some more transfer rumours, and there's quite a lot to talk about this week. Jai Hindley, currently with Team DSM, looks set to rejoin former teammate Wilco Kelderman at Bora Hansgrohe. That will presumably happen at the end of this year when his contract is finished, but young Ilan van Wilder is the latest in a string of riders to leave the team mid-season. The 21-year-old Belgian's destination is as yet unknown, but it has made many ponder whether it's the riders with the problem or the team. Now, we mentioned a few weeks ago that Peter Sagan and his entourage had been linked to Total Direct Energies, and Wielerfits reported last week that the deal is close to being done and will be signed after the Tour de France. The article there stated that Sagan will not only bring 4 riders with him, but also 2 mechanics, 2 soigneurs, a press officer, a sports director, and an entire bike brand, Specialized. Sagan withdrew from the Tour de France before the start of stage 12, citing knee problems. Brian Coquard is set to leave B&B Hotels at the end of the year and head to another French squad, Team Cofidis, whilst it sounds like Elia Viviani will be moving on from the team after a relatively disappointing couple of years, at least so far. Het Nieuwsblad has said that Vincenzo Nebley is heading back to Astana next year, whilst Otto Vergade and Tony Galopin are rumoured to be moving to Nebley's current team, which is Trek Segafredo. There have been 2 contract extensions at De Koning Quickstep, an extra year for Ilio Keiser, which will take him through to the end of next year when he will retire, and an extra 2 years for Fabio Jakobsen, who continues his comeback from that awful crash at the Tour of Poland last year. And finally, former American champion Ruth Winder is going to retire at the end of this year. And I was very surprised about that, since she's still very much at the top of her game. But the decision, in her own words, came down to wanting to spend more time at home in the US. Brabant's Appeal this season and the Tour Down Under last year are amongst the 28-year-old's biggest victories. We wish you all the best in your retirement, Ruth. Right, that's all for this week's show. I'll be back next Monday to wrap up the end of the Tour de France, and I very much hope to see you then. Bye for now, though.